This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze, because life itself is the maze. We're all in it. There's no direct line from here to there, and we're just going to have to follow our path. The journey will take twists, turns, and throw obstacles in our way. That means we're going to make some mistakes along the way, and we have a choice. We can either learn from them, or we can sit around saying, I don't know any better. Sadly to say, for almost the first 60 years of my life, that's what I did. I made a mistake. I was so afraid to admit it, but I would put myself down. I think we're going to learn today from our guest that we don't have to do that we can learn from our mistakes. And maybe they're not mistakes. Maybe they're just a different chance that we took in life. Our guest today is Kristan Swan. I met her through podmatch.com, and I'm looking forward to how you developed this system.
Thank you so much, Karen. It is a real pleasure to be here. And yes, mistakes are the way that I have learned and it's not fun, right? I think we want to be really clear, because there's a lot more conversation around, do we really categorize things as failures? Are we, do we embrace our mistakes, embrace the imperfections of ourselves, right? All of this wonderful kind of positivity around making a mistake, essentially. And yet that doesn't make it any easier in the moment or within the human experience.
Right.
Am I right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it still is so cringy. And I just was, I was reflecting in anticipation of our conversation, and I was thinking about this particular professional mistake and I have definitely done the twists and the turns. I mean, my professional journey is deeply tied to my personal growth as well. So there's not a lot of distinction, let's just say. And I always was kind of a hustler as a kid, right? I starting at age 12, I was babysitting. And even before that, I would notice when my neighbors were going to go on vacation, I'd be like, hey, can I, water your plants or take in your mail, whatever that was. So I have had a very, a varied journey on what I've done. And after, I'm thinking I was probably in my 40s, and well, maybe even 30s. Anyways, I'm 57 now. So I was doing business coaching, and I had really fallen into that because I had been a small business owner and had talk about making a lot of mistakes. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. And it gave me a wealth of information when I realized that I love supporting other people's success. Regardless of what my field is, I'm always looking to help people get to where they want to go. So I'm business coaching, and I'm primarily working with independent business owners, founders who have started a business around the thing that they love to do, and didn't quite realize that there was this whole other entity of the business of running their business, right? So that's kind of where I came in. And there was a woman that I had gotten in contact with who was doing trainings, and she was really, I mean, quite in some ways a little intimidating. She was younger than me. She had worked in the corporate world. She had already published at least one book, if not more. And I admired her, and there was part of me that wanted to be her. And I really looked up to her. And I and also I will say, like I said, I was intimidated,
Right.
and so there was an opportunity for me. She offered to hire me for a training, and it was a training that she wasn't going to be able to attend. And I said, "Oh, no problem." And so I was going to be delivering her content,
Okay.
and at this training, and I had to travel for it, which it just felt really. All of this felt very glamorous and very. I'm like, oh, I'm doing it. I'm getting into the corporate training world, and oh, was, I was really excited. And, she and I met a few times to kind of talk through the material. And I remember at one point she'd expressed some concern that maybe I really wasn't getting it. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. I've got this. Right. And I really didn't. I mean, if let me back up before I talk about the epic fail. The I really didn't have the material, and I wasn't. My pride, essentially, my ego was not willing to let me ask questions around it,
Got it.
and even to the point where I was not willing to practiced in front of people, right? I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to I don't want to embarrass myself. I mean, wouldn't that have been a great idea? Yes, it would have been. So fast forward, I get to the training site. We're delivering a training to a group of women, and there's been kind of this merger. And so it's the new company is introducing this culture of doing these types of retreats and professional development. And the people who are the core of my audience, they don't necessarily want to be there. This is not their culture. So, and I learned that I'm picking up on that during breakfast, because I eat breakfast with the people who ultimately are the attendees of my group. And there's a couple other facilitators, and we go into our groups. And oh, and I've been told to dress professionally, so I have a blouse on and a blazer. And I come in, and i I knew it within the first, I don't know, 3 minutes. This group wanted nothing to do with me. I had completely I had I had dressed wrong for the occasion. I didn't know anything about these people that I was supposed to take on this learning journey, and and also cover material that was somewhat that would require some vulnerability within the group, right? So I do the first session. I've got two sessions that day, and after the first session, there's frantic phone calls from the woman who hired me. And she's been getting frantic phone calls from the people who hired her saying, Kristan is horrible. This is just, this is not working. And so she calls me and she's like, okay, this is not working. You got to get it together, because you've got another session basically delivering the same content, just that they were rotating groups around. And I'm like, okay, yes, I can agree that was rough. I don't think it was, I'm laughing because I'm still kind of saying, I don't think it was quite as bad as it's being, I'm trying to like save some face here, right? And I do the next group, and it's not as bad, but it's not great.
Yeah.
And thank goodness. I don't know. Anyways, the way it was just this one intensive day. And let me tell you, I could not wait to go home. I really didn't want to interact with the other facilitators who could not. They were going on and on about how great their sessions were, how wonderful their participants were. And I get home, and it's like, I am devastated. I know that I felt like this was my big moment, right? And I blew it. And I I didn't avoid her phone call, the woman who hired me, but I did not reach out to her first, I don't think. And so eventually we connected and she just said, I don't think I, I can't pay you for this session.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I can accept that, right? I would agree that it did not go well. And so I had to kind of, I nursed my wounds for a while. And then I think probably the week after I had kind of gotten myself together enough and I started thinking about that whole experience. And I mean, there were so many lessons, and there are lessons that continue with me today. I mean, for starters, right? What I learned is, gosh, Kristan, the next time you get hired to go, especially to go, it doesn't matter if you're traveling across the
Yeah.
country or traveling across town or up the street, like get curious about who you're delivering the content to, right? Like ask more questions. I mean, I was so in the moment of, oh, I just, I didn't ask any questions. And I felt like, and this is one thing that I really want to impart to your listeners, that there is somehow, I think, a stigma or a belief that we have that somehow asking questions is makes you seem less knowledgeable or less
Right.
professional or less, somehow you are inferior if you need to get more information.
Sure. And
Have you,
that's
I
not,
mean, do you,
and really, if you ask the right questions, which most of us will, that makes us look smarter than we really are.
oh my gosh, exactly, right? And I think, I mean, it's funny because I think about, and I knew this in my previous career. I mean, I was really good at asking questions. I mean, for years I did landscape design and I did design work for interior spaces as well. And I mean, my whole existence was asking my clients questions to help them think about what it was that we were trying to create together,
Exactly.
right? But yet, because I had a couple things going on, right? I wasn't feeling that confident, right? And I was trying to impress this woman, right, essentially, right? I was trying to eh, I was, like I said, not feeling confident, trying to impress her. Asking questions felt like I was going to seem like I was ill prepared when it would have served me better, and more importantly, it would have served the participants of this workshop better,
Exactly.
right? And so I think that asking questions is so important. And then the other thing that I will say, and this is true, I mean, I will say that again, this is a skill that you can employ in your personal life, professional life. I, as I mentioned, I knew about 2 minutes in that I I had dressed incorrectly. A lot of my examples that I was using to kind of to stories to flesh out the material that I was teaching um, were not were not matched to my audience, and I could feel that. I mean, we can feel when we're in a one-on-one conversation and the other person, we're losing them, right?
Exactly.
And I instead of there was such an opportunity to stop what I was doing and say, wow, like how many people really would rather not be here right now? right? I mean, like, name the thing that you are seeing and
Right.
feeling, right? Because how much more does that draw people in instead of, I could have been a cardboard cutout up there, and the cardboard version of me would have done a much better job, because at least the cardboard version of me would have stopped talking, right? So, but just like the minute it's feeling off, like, name it,
Yeah.
and bring people in with you on that. And like I said, this can also be in a one-on-one conversation where you just feel like that, you see their eyes kind of glaze over, or you can tell they're thinking about, oh gosh, when's my next appointment, or what's the grocery list,
Yeah.
or whatever. And just say, hey, I'm let's what do you want to talk about? Or I
Exactly.
mean, whatever it is that you say, just to break that moment, right? And I didn't do that. And in part I didn't do that because I felt like the woman who hired me, and this is not a criticism of her, but there was so much of our conversation had been around delivering this content that I did not give myself the permission in that moment to do what I knew in my, heart and stomach, and every part of my body was like, oh God, this is going off the rails. And I was like, oh God, no. But there's that other part of me that was like, oh, you've got to deliver this content. And so I think that for me, just on a kind of on a very specific level, it reminded me that probably when I am hired to speak to groups, that I need to be delivering my content,
Exactly. Exactly. I
right?
I can totally relate to that.
Can you relate to
Yeah.
this? And her content was amazing. I mean, I wanted to be an expert at her content, but I just wasn't.
Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting as I'm hearing your story. Um, I used to do some corporate training, and I was doing corporate training on um, time card systems. And I was at a university in Michigan and had to travel to it. I knew the content, okay, because it was something that I knew I had studied, I'd been trained on it. And I walked in and they didn't want to be there. They were professors, they were people that I could care less how this works, just tell me one thing to do, and that's all I want to know. And as I started the intro, I saw them, and I don't know where I got the courage to do it. And I said,
Mm,
oh, so you don't like what I'm saying? And I had one professor who said, we're professors. We don't know this technical stuff. Like, is there just a card we go to a time clock and punch? And I said, no, you're going to have to get into the system. And this is what you have to look for. And he wasn't happy, but all of a sudden it started to click. I have to use the computer. Now, this was 15, 20 years ago when there was
right.
still a hesitancy. I don't want to use computer. I go to the library, I get a book, whatever. And so I just changed the training around and I made sure they were comfortable with the computer. I did not train them on how to do it. At my lunch hour, I went and I made notes and I photocopied them and handed them out. They were all now comfortable. They knew where to go and they didn't want to sit there all day long and learn. But sometimes we don't have that ability to be able to do that. Again,
Yeah.
you were there with somebody else's content trying to be her because you liked her. You liked what she did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was, I think the other thing too, and it was interesting because I wanted to make things right. And pretty soon after I got home, even in the midst of my misery, I I created a new training for them, that was my content. Because there was also a big mismatch between what this new company, their culture that they were coming in, and they were really feeling like they were kind of gifting this group of attendees this wonderful experience,
Yes.
right? And some of them did get a wonderful experience with the other facilitators. However, I also think that there was a real mismatch of not appreciating the culture that the new company
Sure.
was had acquired. So, I ended up putting together this whole training, and I was like, I think this would actually be really great. And I would go there, I would fly out on my own, dime
Yes.
and deliver this if they wanted. And it was interesting because the woman who hired me was not willing to entertain that. She had moved on, and it's and I didn't have I that was not my connection, so I could not reach directly out to the company, and I probably wouldn't have done that because that would have felt I didn't want to do an end run around her. But it was, I mean, as it I can still, back to the idea of learning from our mistakes, right? It's like, wow, if I put myself back in front of, the classroom with that blazer that just got more ill-fitting as the day went on, right? And I can feel the little, I can feel the dread in my stomach. I can feel the shame of letting this person down, and kind of feeling like I was letting myself down, right? And I can still conjure up all those feelings. And the reality is, boy, I learned so much in those, 3 days or whatever, including the travel days or whatever. And those are lessons that have gone with me uh, for years now. And what a gift.
Well, I think the sad part is we learn from our parents. That's a mistake. Don't do that.
Hmm. Hmm.
We aren't necessarily taught, is there another way to do it? Or how did that happen? Um, I remember bringing this up to my mother one day saying, you never really taught me how to do things. I always heard that's not the way to do it. And
Mm.
she didn't realize it. She said, well, of course I taught you how to do things. And I said, no, my mother was a seamstress. I could barely sew a hem on something. And she would say, well, that's not the way to do it. And she would take it, she'd rip it out, and she'd say, watch me. But she did it so quickly, I had no idea what she was doing. And so my answer always was, okay, I get it. Um, and so when I was older, I mentioned it to her and she goes, I'm so sorry. But then I
Mm.
realized I was doing the same thing with my boys. I wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily saying, maybe there's another way to do it. Or what did you learn from that experience rather than say, oh, that's terrible that that happened. And it really was my youngest son who, about 15 years ago, looked at me and said, Mom, you've really come a long way. And I didn't realize I was learning from my mistakes. I was making changes. He was noticing it. I hadn't realized I had done that. And that's when it was like, well, thank you. And then when I realized what I was doing, he picked up on it.
Mm.
So we do walk around with a lot of shame. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is internal shame. Maybe somebody didn't even get mad at us for it. Maybe, in your case, maybe the people would have said, oh, well, she's not the best, trainer, but okay, no big deal. And it never would have gotten to the other person. You wouldn't have known to make a
Right.
change.
Yeah. Well, it's, as you're we're talking about kind of the models that we grow up with, right? Whether it's our parents or our, I mean, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, and I my parents were pretty much polar opposites. It always it always was a little bit of a head scratcher to me of how these two people got together. They did not stay together very long. So that was not the head scratcher. I was not ever one of those kids who was like, oh gosh, I hope my parents get back together. I was always like, how did you guys come together? And no surprise, my grandparents on either side could not have been more different. And it was so interesting because I feel like I grew up in this kind of you know these two different, very opposing in some way, belief systems, right? For my one grandmother, my mom's mom, like if you could not do something fast, that was somehow you were deficient.
Mm.
You must be stupid, essentially. If it takes you too long, and this could be like answering a question, or whatever. I mean, from every little thing. And I don't think she had probably received that, right?
Sure.
From whatever from her parents, from school. So there was this, if you can't do it fast, then you must be no good at it. And then if you're no good at it, going back to that, like, why would you put yourself in the
Yeah. Yeah.
position to try again? And we know that that is so not the way to learn anything or achieve any mastery, right, around something. And then my other grandparents were so methodical and careful and thoughtful to the point where it also seemed like they never made mistakes because they were they were always looking at all the different angles for everything. I mean, talk about, going, driving, doing a little road trip. It was like, oh gosh, well, the maps are out. And okay, so this was, obviously before we had these phones that are smartphones navigating for us. But, they would be like plotting the route, and then, oh, well, what if there's traffic or a detour? Okay, well, then this is the other route. So they were the opposite in that they were so slow, but it was still kind of the core message as a young child was, nobody makes mistakes around here.
Wow.
No. And I think that so as a result, I mean, it was kind of my persona was to, I dove into perfectionism, with both feet, so to
Sure.
speak. It's, and so that is the other thing that I love as time has gone on is, there's nothing that's perfect, right?
Right.
And there's such beauty. The Japanese have the what is it, wasabi, or wait, not wasabi, the there's a phrase that they use about kind of the complete beauty in kind of the off kilter or the mistake, right? And and that is, and unfortunately I didn't necessarily bring that along to my
Sure.
kids, right? That has been something, and my kids do know that I am, I'm definitely, they know that I am ready, fire, aim. And my one son has noticed, he's like, I really appreciate, that you're not afraid to change. And so, the kind of similar
Sure.
to your story, I appreciate hearing that. And it doesn't make it any less, hard to go through
Well,
these moments.
we're living in a society where everybody is very judgmental. So as
Mm.
I told you before we came on air, um, I had to change somebody's schedule for today. I had not heard positively they were going to be on. And so I sent an email saying, I haven't heard from you. So I'm canceling. And it's been 3 months since this had been scheduled. Um, this person tried to make me feel like I made the mistake. And
Mm.
at first, I started taking it on. It was like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And then it was like, stop. Even if I did something wrong, and I apologized to the person, I said, but because I hadn't heard from you, my assumption was because I do ask for confirmation and I didn't get it, that either you had changed your mind or maybe you weren't reading your email. I don't know. And I said,
Oh,
but today came along and you haven't, responded. So I'm going to make my day easier. I'm not going to sit here waiting. Um, in the past, I would have done that. I would have been sitting here waiting and waiting for the person and then start asking myself, what did you do wrong, Karen? Why didn't you do it better? And it's like, we all make mistakes. Okay, maybe he made the mistake. Maybe I made it. It doesn't matter. How can I learn from this? And so one of the things I did decide this morning when this happened, probably for about the third or fourth time in 5 years, so not that often, but I
not
did
that often.
decide that if I don't get that confirmation within a week after setting it, I'm just going to send out a message that I am canceling. You can try to contact me in the future. Now, if they contact me right away, okay, it was a slip on their part. They didn't confirm. If they don't, you know what? Then I'm okay.
Yeah,
I can make that change. But we keep waiting to be judged. And then when we do get judged and people come right at us about it, we take it all on our shoulders. Whoa, I'm really not a good person. Look at the mistakes I've made.
I know, right? And there's so much in what you just were saying that I feel like, I as a business coach, I would, I'd recommend that people implement systems and those things, which, describing your system, right? I
Right.
love hearing that. And that you also can change. I would recommend, okay, so we're going to put a system in, and again, to speak to a lot of the people that I was coaching, no surprise, were perfectionists too, right? And it was like, we're just going to put a system in place for this moment, and you're going to let it go for a while, and you're going to kind of make notes about what's working about this and what's not. And then after you've let it kind of run its course for a little bit, we can then reflect on the information and make changes if that's necessary, right? But so it's very easy. And, again, I love kind of connecting to the story of you delivering the training to the professors, right? It's like the minute you kind of remove something from where people are taking it internally as a judgment, or
Yep.
as something that is a reflection on who they are, right? So like in the case of my system suggestion to my perfectionist, clients, it was like somehow just giving it that space and saying, we're just going to create this thing, and then we're going to give ourselves permission to make changes. And I think that we also have this inability to, that again, kind of some of the messaging I got, and I don't think it's I think there's a little bit of a universal truth around it in talking to other people, is that somehow changing your mind it means that you're less serious,
Yes.
right? And again, it's kind of like it actually needs to be changing your mind. needs to be held right up there next to you, asking questions as this is a really good thing to do, right? You make a choice or you chart a path based on the information you have right there in that moment.
Exactly.
And then when you get new pieces of information, you absolutely give yourself permission to change your mind,
Exactly.
right?
But
And
we don't teach this at an early stage. And the sad thing
mhm,
is we get to be adults. And not that we think we have to be perfect, but we supposedly are learned. We supposedly know what to do. Um, and the problem is that the world is evolving so quickly around us that
right.
it's very easy that I could have said yesterday, Kristan, instead of, meeting at noon today, we need to meet at 12:15 because the internet, something
Yeah.
is, and if you didn't agree for whatever reason, then you have to have a conversation about it. You have to
Yeah.
dialogue. And what is happening is we don't want to dialogue because we use our smartphones and we text back and forth and we don't use
Yeah.
real words. And so we don't know what the other person is really thinking or saying. And this is where a lot of our mistakes are being made in today's world.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we have to learn from them. I used to be one in the last year or two. I just found it easier to text. I don't anymore. Now I tell somebody, I need to talk to you. And I will, if you need me to, I will set a timer and we will talk for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you have. But I'm
Right.
going to get my message to you. And they'll say, oh, but you can text it. Well, number one, I don't know if you're reading it. Number two, I don't know how you're responding to it.
Oh, yeah.
We've got to get back to that and not be afraid. And fear is a lot of what we're talking about today.
Oh, it is, right. And when we are, I can speak firsthand, when we are making choices out of fear, they are oftentimes, well, for myself, they have not been the choices that have been really in alignment with who I am or who I want to be. And that is that, and that happens in big and small ways, right? I mean, it can be that you say yes to attending something, for a friend, because you're afraid that if you say no, that they're not going to like you
Right.
anymore. And to your point of talking to each other, right? I mean, if we were okay with picking up the phone, or if it's somebody that we can, that is right down the hall that we can talk to, just saying, gosh, I'm not sure if this is my thing. And I really love hanging out with you. Is there, something else? And what you might learn in that moment, right, is that the person would say to you, your friend would say, it's not really my thing either. And I am going because, my child or my partner or someone that I am networking with, they kind of put this on my plate. So gosh, if we go and we kind of, we go for like 15 or 20 minutes and then we can go do the thing, that we really like
Like to
doing,
do.
taking a walk or having coffee or whatever, right? And how much more you might learn, because we've created this whole story when we get this text message that says, hey, will you go to this thing with me? And we're like, oh God, this is like the most important thing in the world. And it may not be, and it may be actually the most important thing in the world to them, in which case then we also have an opportunity as a human being to say, you know what, because this isn't so important to you, I'm going to do it. Like, this isn't my thing, but I'm going to do this because that's how I also want to show up. Right. So there's so much more nuance and richness in our when we are willing to, kind of meet that other person or people with our heart open, essentially, right? With some vulnerability.
Absolutely. So, how can my listeners find you? And if they're looking
Mm.
for a business coach or somebody to help them understand, it's okay to make a mistake because, like I said, I think there are millions of us out here who are saying, I wouldn't know how not to make a mistake, but I'm afraid to admit mine.
Yeah. Well, I have a website, kristanswan.com. So there's a lot of good information on there, and there's some fun stuff that you can read. I have a journal that is called Spaghetti on the Wall, and it is a journal. It's a prompted journal, and so that you can see that on the website as well. And it is for sale, and I call it an elegant journal to organize the messy ideas of life. So
Like that.
it really is a way to hopefully develop a habit of discernment, which is kind of a fancy way of saying, gosh, just getting to know yourself better, right?
Exactly.
And because I think that's where kind of more clarity and better communication starts, right? Is like we got to know who we are.
Oh, absolutely.
And my primary focus right now is really around group facilitation. I have moved a little bit. I still have some one-on-one clients, but primarily kind of back to what we were just saying, I am in the mode right now of getting people together in person and sharing and talking because I could, obviously I could talk all day long. And how much more powerful it is when we can be in these kind of intimate small group settings and see the humanity that is right there in every single one of us. And that means the things that we think are perfect about that other person that are not, and all of the richness that is the human experience.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. All your information will be in the show notes. So
Thank
those of you
you.
listening, you'll be able to get through to kristanswan.com and
Thank you.
have a wonderful day. Thank
You
you.
too, Karen. Such a pleasure. Stay
Bye-bye.
well.